They thought he was just the photographer, a face behind a lens, a service provider hired to document someone else's happiness. But they didn't know. That man had once been the only reason the groom survived. Gabriel arrived early that morning. His fingers were steady, his camera bag packed neatly, but his heart carried the weight of a love buried in silence. The venue was lavish, echoing money and legacy, with guests who spoke in low tones and smiled with controlled elegance. Gabriel moved through them like air, invisible yet everywhere. No one looked twice, not even the man about to get married. Daniel. The name hit Gabriel's chest like a whisper from a grave. Years ago, that name had filled his apartment with laughter and late-night tears. That name had clung to him when Daniel's parents threw their son out into the cold for being gay. When no one else opened their door, Gabriel had opened his. When no one else picked up the call, Gabriel had stayed up all night just to hear Daniel breathe. But those nights were gone, or so Gabriel had told himself. When he received the booking confirmation 2 weeks earlier, he thought it was a coincidence. Just another job. Then he saw the groom's name. He almost declined it. Almost. But something in him needed to see the ending, even if he wasn't invited to be a part of it. As he photographed the preparations, Daniel never once looked him in the eye. Gabriel kept the camera between them like a shield. He documented the way Daniel adjusted his cufflinks, how his mother smiled at him with pride, the same woman who once called her son an abomination and Gabriel a manipulator. No one seemed to remember. Gabriel didn't want to be bitter. He had healed, or tried to. Life had moved on, and he had turned his heartbreak into art. He never posted about it, never told his clients. But in the quiet of his studio, in the soft grain of black and white portraits, his pain always found a place to live. He told himself this job was just another assignment. But then came the rehearsal slideshow. The family had requested a walk through time, photos from Daniel's youth to his career to meeting the bride. They sent Gabriel a curated folder, carefully selected, polished, sterile. Nothing before college. No images of struggle, nothing from those years Daniel was missing. Gabriel stayed up all night piecing together the slideshow, but as he stared at the screen, something shifted. He remembered a photo he took years ago, Daniel asleep on a worn couch, arms tucked in, a bandage visible near his ribs. Another of the two of them standing outside the emergency room, rain falling, Gabriel holding a coat over Daniel's head. There were hundreds, all tucked away in a folder he never opened again. He stared at those images, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, without knowing why, or perhaps knowing exactly why, he replaced the slideshow. Not with the polished past Daniel's family wanted, but with the truth. The next morning, he arrived at the venue like nothing had changed. The wedding coordinator smiled and asked for the slideshow file. Gabriel handed her the USB and said nothing. As the ceremony began, Gabriel stood at the back of the aisle, camera in hand, steady breath, quiet resolve. His name wouldn't be called. There would be no toast for him, no seat at the family table. But when the projector flickered to life and the first photo appeared, Gabriel was no longer invisible. He was the past they tried to erase. He was the man who saved the groom's life, and soon he would be the reason the wedding stopped. If you've ever been written out of someone's story just to protect their image, this story is for you. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more real, emotional LGBTQ+ narratives, where the truth always finds a voice. The lights dimmed, and the first notes of a sentimental piano piece drifted through the air. Guests turned their heads toward the screen, expecting to see childhood snapshots of Daniel in birthday hats and family vacations, smiling beside a girl who would become his wife. Instead, what they saw was a grainy black and white photograph of Daniel, barely 20, lying curled on a faded couch. His face was gaunt, eyes swollen shut, ribs wrapped in gauze. The room in the photo was small, cluttered, but there was a gentleness in the composition, a kind of reverence in the way the light framed his silhouette. A murmur moved through the room. A few faces stiffened, unsure. The next image appeared. Daniel again, seated on a fire escape in the rain, hoodie soaked, head on someone's shoulder. The face of the man beside him was partly out of frame, but to Gabriel, to anyone who had known them back then, there was no mistaking who it was. Gabriel. The guests shifted in their seats. The bride's mother leaned toward her husband, whispering. The groom's father sat frozen, jaw clenched. One image bled into the next, Daniel laughing on a rooftop, eating instant noodles in pajamas, crying into a hoodie that clearly wasn't his. In every photo, there was a presence just beyond the frame, sometimes an arm, sometimes a reflection in a window, sometimes just a shadow holding the camera. They had all been taken by Gabriel, and they told a story no one had been invited to hear. Daniel stood at the front of the aisle, eyes glued to the screen. For the first time that day, his carefully combed hair, his polished tuxedo, the practiced smile on his lips, all of it dropped away. What replaced it was the face of someone remembering, someone who was no longer hiding. Gabriel didn't move. He didn't flinch. His hands rested calmly on the camera, though his throat tightened with each frame. He had expected to be pulled aside, to be yelled at, maybe even escorted out. But no one moved, no one breathed. The truth had become too loud to speak over. Then the screen went black, the music faded, and silence fell like dust. It was Daniel who broke it. He turned around, stepped forward, and walked past the altar. His shoes echoed against the stone floor. All eyes followed. When he reached the center aisle, he turned not to the bride, but to the back of the room, to the man with the camera. "Stop filming," he said. Gabriel blinked, slowly lowered the lens. The room tensed, but Daniel didn't scold him. He didn't ask why. Instead, he said, "Come here." Some gasped, some sat back, unsure if this was still part of the ceremony. Gabriel hesitated, but Daniel nodded. And in a moment that split the wedding into before and after, Gabriel stepped forward. He walked slowly, past guests who now recognized him, or at least the version of him that had been hidden for so long. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered his name. One older woman, who had once called him just a phase, turned away in shame. When he reached Daniel, the groom said simply, "I can't keep pretending the man who saved my life never existed." Daniel turned to face the guests. "For those of you who never knew, I spent years being told to erase him, told to trade history for acceptance. But this man fed me when I had nothing, sat beside me through nights I didn't think I'd survive. He is not a mistake. He is not a secret. He is the reason I'm still alive." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was stunned, cracked open by truth. Then came the voice of Daniel's mother. Her tone wasn't soft. It wasn't broken. It was cold. "So what you want us to clap, to rewrite everything for a fling you had when you were confused?" The temperature dropped. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time in his life, didn't flinch. He wasn't a fling. He was family when I didn't have one. He turned back to Gabriel. "I didn't know how to fight for you then. I'm not asking for a second chance. I couldn't let today be built on a lie." And just like that, the room shifted. Not with applause, not with cheers, but with a kind of reluctant respect. The kind that follows someone finally telling the truth out loud. Gabriel didn't respond. He didn't need to. His presence alone had already rewritten the script. The wedding wasn't over, but the version they'd all rehearsed, that one had just ended. No one applauded. No one moved. The air inside the wedding hall had thickened, as if truth itself had weight, heavy, inescapable. Gabriel stood beneath the chandelier, across from Daniel, unsure what to do next. This was not part of the drama. He hadn't come to reclaim anything, hadn't planned a confrontation, and yet, here he was. No longer just the man behind the lens, but the man in the center of their story. Before he could step back, someone else did. The bride, Elena. She walked slowly from her place at the altar. Her gown shimmered, designed for photographs and grandeur. But her face wore something else entirely. Clarity, a kind of knowing that didn't match the stunned confusion on the guests' faces. She stood between the two men. Her gaze moved from Daniel to Gabriel and then to the silent crowd. "I want you all to breathe," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud, but it carried. "I knew about Gabriel. I've always known." A gasp rippled across the pews. One of the bridesmaids covered her mouth. "I've known since the day Daniel and I met. He told me the truth, not just about who he loved, but about who helped him survive. And I never once asked him to hide that." Daniel's mother looked up, eyes narrow. "You knew, and you still—" "Yes," Elena interrupted. "Because this wasn't a wedding built on hiding. This was a suaonida, and I was never the bride you thought I was." Another wave of shock passed through the room. She took Daniel's hand. "We agreed from the beginning that this day wasn't about starting a marriage. It was about ending a silence." Elena turned back toward the crowd. "You all sent invitations to friends, colleagues, cousins twice removed, but not one to the man who nursed Daniel back to life when this family turned its back. So we decided if you wouldn't invite the truth, we'd bring it ourselves." A man from the groom's side stood abruptly. "So this was all fake a performance?" Elena nodded. "No, it was a statement." The man scoffed. "You wasted everyone's time for drama." Gabriel opened his mouth to speak, but Elena raised a hand. "No, yeah, not drama, visibility." Her voice sharpened. "Because some of you still whisper about Daniel's past like it's a stain. Some of you thought if he married a woman, it would make him more acceptable." Silence, and then, "But what if I told you the only reason he ever agreed to this wedding was because I asked him to be you?" She looked back at Daniel. "Because we both knew this family never mourned who you really were. They just waited for you to become someone else." Gabriel's hands tightened around his camera strap. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even shocked. He was seen for the first time in years. His pain was no longer just his own to carry. Daniel turned to his parents. "I was ready to go through with this charade if it meant giving you peace, but not at the cost of my own. I loved him. I still do." His father looked like he'd aged in minutes. His mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Elena stepped back. "I'm not here to be pitied. I'm here because I believe in love. And I believe the kind of love that saves your life should never be hidden in photo albums no one sees." She looked at Gabriel. "You didn't crash this wedding. You were always part of it." Then, without another word, she walked to the front of the aisle, unclipped her veil, and placed it carefully on a chair. Her bouquet followed. One by one, guests began to rise, some in silent judgment, others in thoughtful stillness. A few left, a few stayed. Gabriel still hadn't spoken. His chest was tight, his legs numb. He had walked in that morning as a hired hand, expecting nothing but a paycheck and the ache of old memories. He had stayed quiet for years, letting other people rewrite the chapters he helped build. But not today. As he turned toward the door, Daniel called out, "Don't go." Gabriel paused. Daniel took a step forward. "You once told me that the truth always finds its way back. I didn't believe you then. But today, I hope you see it." Gabriel looked at him for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "Truth doesn't erase what happened, but it can stop the lie from becoming permanent." He didn't say more. He didn't need to, because the truth was already standing in front of them, dressed not in a tuxedo or a gown, but in scars and stories and the quiet courage to be remembered. And sometimes that was enough. The hall emptied slowly. Some left in whispers, coats clutched, heels echoing down the marble floor like punctuation to a story they didn't want to hear. Others lingered, uncertain whether what they had witnessed was a public disaster or an act of unshakable honesty. A few approached Daniel to offer quiet nods of support. Fewer still looked Gabriel in the eyes. But the silence between Daniel and his parents held more weight than any words could fill. His father stood near the altar, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. The man who once refused to visit Daniel during his lowest days now seemed incapable of leaving, as though motion might confirm what had just unraveled before him. Beside him, Daniel's mother sat rigid, eyes red but dry, not from tears, from pride bruised. Gabriel remained near the doorway, unsure whether to stay or go. His chest ached not from regret, but from the swell of something unfamiliar, a fragile, restless kind of justice. One that didn't scream or punish, just revealed. A woman, an aunt maybe, approached him hesitantly. "I didn't know," she said. "Back then, no one told us what he went through." Gabriel looked at her. His voice was calm. "They didn't need to tell you. You just had to ask." She didn't respond, just walked away. Behind him, the projector had gone dark. The music had stopped. The fairy tale wedding everyone expected had collapsed, not with rage, but with the unbearable weight of reality finally stepping through the door. Daniel's mother rose from her seat and walked toward her son. Her heels clicked like judgment. "You humiliated us," she said, barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut. "We gave you a second chance. We accepted you back. And this is how you repay us." Daniel stood still, hands at his sides. "You didn't accept me. You accepted the version of me that made you feel comfortable." His father's voice, deep and dry, joined in. "You think you're brave for doing this? You used a wedding to make a spectacle. You think you'll be remembered as some kind of hero?" Daniel looked at both of them, then toward Gabriel, then back again. "I don't care how I'm remembered," he said. "I care that he is." The word "he" hung in the air like smoke, and for once no one dared try to wave it away. "You're throwing your future away," his mother hissed. "No," Daniel replied. "I'm finally choosing it." And just like that, they turned away. No threats, no shouting, just two people unable, or unwilling, to face the child they never truly saw. As they reached the door, Daniel's mother paused. "You could have had everything." "I did," Daniel answered softly. "And I gave it up the day I let him walk away." Their silhouettes disappeared into the afternoon light. A symbolic exit if there ever was one. Gabriel remained motionless. Daniel approached. Slow steps across a battlefield, blended in flower petals and shattered expectations. "I didn't know Elena would do that," he said. "She told me she had a plan. I thought it would be small, quiet, just enough to honor you." Gabriel nodded. "It wasn't her job to honor me." "No," Daniel said, voice hoarse. "It was mine." For a moment, neither spoke. The room, once packed with noise and ceremony, now felt holy in its stillness. Then, from the back of the room, the venue manager stepped forward. "There's someone here to see Gabriel." Gabriel turned. A young man stood by the entrance, tall, suited, holding a leather folder. He walked over and extended his hand. "Mr. Gabriel, I represent Mr. DuPont from Paris Photo Archive. He saw your work in the slideshow, the Candid series. He'd like to meet you personally." Gabriel froze. "DuPont? Yes. He said your framing, the intimacy, he hasn't seen anything that honest in years. He wants to discuss exhibiting the collection. The Years We Forgot. Is that the working title?" Gabriel swallowed. He hadn't used that folder name in a decade. "I never submitted it." The man smiled. "You didn't need to. Truth has a way of traveling." And with that, he left a card and disappeared into the light. Daniel looked at him. "I didn't send anything. Maybe Elena." Gabriel shook his head. But something inside him shifted. The kind of shift that happens when silence is broken and someone listens. He looked at the empty hall, the ruined ceremony, the rawness left behind. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe this wasn't a ruined wedding after all." Daniel asked gently, "Was it worth it?" Gabriel turned to him. "Every frame, The sun had dipped lower by the time Gabriel stepped outside. He walked alone through the garden behind the venue, camera still hanging from his shoulder, its weight familiar and grounding. The party had long since dispersed. Chairs were being stacked, petals swept away, and the stage dismantled, as if the day's truth could be cleaned up like decoration. But truth didn't go away. It lingered, settled, transformed the air. Behind him, the sound of footsteps approached, measured and unsure. It was Daniel, no longer in tuxedo, no more boutonniere, just a man, stripped of performance, standing in the same place he used to sleep on Gabriel's secondhand couch with a blanket tucked under his chin. "I don't expect anything from you," Daniel said quietly. "Not forgiveness, not another try. I just didn't want to lose the chance to say thank you for saving me, not just then, but now too. You could have stayed silent. You had every reason to." Gabriel didn't respond right away. He watched a leaf fall from a tree above, slow and steady. Then he spoke. "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came to remember myself." Daniel looked at him, eyes soft. "Did it work?" Gabriel exhaled. "Yes." They stood in that stillness, the kind that didn't ask for more than presence. Then Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and held it out. Gabriel hesitated, then took it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a copy, printed from an old scan, slightly faded, but unmistakable. Daniel at 21, curled up in Gabriel's bed, clutching a sketchbook, eyes half closed in sleep. Written on the bow, "The night I didn't give up." Gabriel stared at it, throat tight. "I carried it in my wallet for years," Daniel said. "Even when I was pretending you never existed. Even when they made me delete the rest." He smiled sadly. "I'm done pretending now." Gabriel held the photo carefully, like something fragile and sacred. But he knew this moment wasn't about returning to the past. It was about releasing it. He slid the photo back into the envelope, folded it, and tucked it into his pocket. Then he looked up at Daniel for the last time that day. "Some love stories don't need to be rekindled," he said. "They just need to be respected." Daniel nodded, and Gabriel turned to leave. He didn't need a grand farewell. He didn't need an apology carved in stone. He had the truth, and he had his name returned to the narrative. That was enough. As he reached the parking lot, his phone buzzed. A message from the curator. "Your exhibition slot is confirmed. Paris in May. Let us know what title you want to use." He stared at the screen, then, slowly, typed "the frame they tried to crop." A smile flickered across his lips. That night, Gabriel developed the last photo he took at the wedding. A candid frame he almost deleted. Elena, standing between two men, veil in one hand, the other resting gently on Daniel's back. A moment of quiet solidarity. He printed it, framed it, and placed it beside the image from the hospital couch all those years ago, side by side. Then he turned off the lights, and for the first time in years, slept without regret. Have you ever been written out of someone's life, only to find your voice again later? Tell us in the comments. Your truth might be what someone else needs to hear. For more stories of dignity reclaimed, silence broken, and love that refuses to be erased, subscribe to Heart Stories, where real lives find their voice again.